This story tells how a simple decision to have fun turned into a nightmare for a teenager, and how one night of excitement can spiral into consequences that last far longer than anyone imagines. Jake had always been the type of kid who tried to stay out of trouble, or at least that's how his parents saw him. He was quiet in class, attentive, and had a small circle of friends who shared his love for video games and skateboarding. But like most teenagers, he had a hunger for adventure, a desire to feel a little bigger than his age, and a craving to impress his friends. When his parents announced they were going out of town for the weekend, Jake saw an opportunity that, at the time, seemed harmless. He would host a small party, just a few friends, some music, snacks, maybe a few sodas and chips. Nothing extreme, nothing illegal. Just a chance to feel like an adult in a house that was temporarily his own. As the day of the party arrived, Jake meticulously prepared. He cleaned the living room, rearranged the furniture to create more space, and even put up a few string lights for atmosphere. In his mind, this was going to be a night of harmless fun. He texted a handful of friends, making sure they knew it was just a private gathering. Yet he didn't know that one of them, Tyler, had been hiding something that could change everything. Tyler had recently been involved with the wrong crowd, experimenting with stolen alcohol and small amounts of drugs, just for the thrill of it. When he arrived at Jake's house, he carried with him a bag that to Jake's eyes seemed unimportant. "Just some drinks," Tyler said casually, winking as he set the bag down in the corner. Jake, trusting his friend, didn't inspect it further. The party began innocently enough. Music thumped from the speakers, laughter echoed through the house, and the first few hours passed with video games, jokes, and harmless pranks. Jake moved from room to room, making sure everyone had snacks, and that nobody got too rowdy. But as the night went on, the energy shifted. The drinks came out, and a few friends started experimenting with the contents of Tyler's bag. Jake noticed the change, a subtle tension creeping into the laughter, but he told himself it wasn't his responsibility. He hadn't brought anything illegal into the house, he hadn't encouraged anyone, and surely, he thought, it would be fine. Then came the knock. At first, Jake thought it was a prank, a joke his friends were planning to scare him with. But the pounding on the door grew heavier, more insistent, and a deep, authoritative voice called out, "Police! Open up!" Panic struck him like a lightning bolt. His heart raced. His friends froze. Tyler's eyes went wide, and a silence fell over the room that felt thicker than any wall. Jake stumbled to the door, fumbling with the lock, trying to understand what was happening. Moments later, uniformed officers entered, their presence commanding and terrifying. They had received complaints from neighbors, loud noise, suspicious activity, and more importantly, someone had tipped them off about illegal substances at the house. Jake's mind spun. He hadn't touched anything. He hadn't encouraged anything. And yet, as he watched officers sift through the rooms bag by bag, he realized that his parents' trust, his sense of safety, and his own innocence were slipping away in front of him. Tyler tried to explain, tried to claim responsibility, but the damage was done. The stolen alcohol, the hidden drugs, and the witnesses, his friends, meant that everyone present was a suspect. Jake's stomach dropped. The police looked at him with a mixture of suspicion and disappointment, handcuffs ready. He tried to speak, to explain that he hadn't known, but his voice cracked under the pressure. This was no longer a party. This was the beginning of a legal nightmare he had never imagined. As Jake was taken to the patrol car, a mixture of fear, shame, and disbelief washed over him. His mind raced through every decision that had led to this moment. Should he have checked Tyler's bag? Should he have canceled the party altogether? Should he have never left the house empty-handed? The questions piled up, each heavier than the last, none with a clear answer. In those moments, as the lights of the police car flashed against the walls of his neighborhood, Jake realized how fragile a teenager's world could be, how quickly trust and innocence could be shattered, and how one night could change everything. What seemed like a harmless choice, a simple desire to have fun, had become a defining moment in his young life. Jake didn't yet know the extent of the consequences: court dates, lawyers, parental disappointment, the whispers at school, but he felt the weight of the world pressing down on him. And in that weight, he understood something essential. Trust, responsibility, and foresight were no longer abstract concepts. They were survival tools in a world that could turn against you in an instant. The next morning, Jake woke up not in his own bed, but in a stark, fluorescent-lit interrogation room. The events of the previous night played over and over in his mind like a broken record. He couldn't believe how quickly things had spiraled out of control. A simple party, a few friends, and suddenly he was facing accusations that no teenager should ever have to imagine. A detective entered the room carrying a folder that seemed to swallow the entire table. "Jake," the man said, his voice calm but firm, "we need to go over last night. Who brought the alcohol? Who had the drugs? We have statements from several witnesses." Jake swallowed hard. His mind raced. I didn't know about any of it," he stammered. "I didn't bring anything. I didn't encourage anyone." The detective raised an eyebrow. "You were the host. Everything happened under your roof. You need to understand that legally, you are responsible for what occurs here." The words hit Jake like a punch to the gut. Responsibility. He had always thought of it as something adults dealt with, something distant from the reckless energy of teenage life. Now it felt heavy, crushing, unavoidable. Hours passed in that room. The detective asked question after question, each one more pointed than the last. "Did you see anyone handling the drugs? Did you warn your friends about the consequences? Why did you allow the party to continue after it got out of hand?" Jake answered honestly, fumbling over his words, his voice cracking under the weight of fear and guilt he didn't deserve. The more he spoke, the more he realized that innocence alone might not be enough to save him. Meanwhile, back at his house, officers were conducting a meticulous search, photographing everything, cataloging every item. Tyler's bag of stolen alcohol and drugs had been found exactly where Jake had assumed it harmlessly sat. His friends were being questioned separately, each adding pieces to a puzzle that painted a far darker picture than Jake had ever imagined. What was supposed to be a night of laughter, games, and camaraderie was now evidence for a police report. The realization that a single poor decision could ripple into chaos hit Jake with a clarity that scared him more than anything else in his life. Jake's parents returned home that afternoon, summoned by the police. They arrived to find their son pale, shaking, and overwhelmed by the reality of the law bearing down on him. Their living room, usually a place of comfort and safety, had transformed into a scene of suspicion and accusation. "We trusted you, Jake," his father said quietly, his disappointment sharp in his tone. His mother's eyes were red, a mixture of fear for her son and frustration at the situation. Jake wanted to explain, to shout that he hadn't known, that he had done nothing wrong, but the words felt inadequate, powerless in the face of official procedures and sworn statements. Over the following days, Jake navigated a confusing maze of police interviews, legal forms, and meetings with a public defender who tried to reassure him. "You didn't commit a crime intentionally," she said, flipping through the paperwork. "But as the host, you're considered accountable. We'll fight it, but you have to understand the severity." The words echoed in Jake's head. Accountable. The responsibility of others' actions now rested on his shoulders. It wasn't just a lesson, it was a burden that would follow him through court hearings, school gossip, and the judgment of anyone who knew the story. Throughout it all, Jake kept thinking of Tyler, the friend who had unknowingly, or perhaps carelessly, dragged him into this nightmare. Anger and betrayal mixed with guilt, Jake wondered if confronting Tyler would help, if demanding accountability could lighten the crushing weight he felt. But every time he considered it, he hesitated. Teenagers were complicated, friendships were fragile, and he wasn't sure that adding confrontation to an already explosive situation would make anything better. Jake's world had contracted from the wide, carefree horizons of his teenage life to the confined, suffocating walls of responsibility, scrutiny, and consequence. He realized that sometimes even the simplest desire, to be seen, to have fun, to impress friends, could collide with the harsh realities of law and morality. And while he had not intended harm, the consequences were very real. It was a lesson in trust, awareness, and the weight of decisions, one that Jake would carry long after the parties ended, the music faded, and the neighbors forgave the noise. The days that followed were a blur for Jake. He moved through them in a haze of paperwork, phone calls, and the constant background noise of gossip spreading faster than he could process. His classmates whispered in the hallways, some casting sympathetic glances, others smirking with the satisfaction of teenage cruelty. Social media didn't make things easier. Pictures of the party circulated with captions that twisted the night into a version of reality that wasn't Jake's own. Each notification on his phone made his chest tighten. Each rumor was a reminder that the world could judge without knowing the truth. His public defender was a seasoned woman named Ms. Harper. She explained the process to him in a voice that tried to combine calm with authority. "Jake, the key here is documentation and witness statements," she said, sitting across from him in a cramped office filled with stacks of case files. "We need to show the court that you had no knowledge of the drugs, that you did not contribute to their presence. But the fact that it happened on your property makes this complicated. You understand, right?" Jake nodded, swallowing hard. He did understand. It was just hard to breathe under the weight of understanding. One afternoon, Ms. Harper accompanied Jake to meet with a witness who had attended the party. His friend Laura was nervous, twisting her hands in front of her. She admitted that she had seen Tyler bringing the bag, but claimed she didn't know what was inside. "I just thought it was snacks or something," she said. Jake felt a mix of relief and guilt. Relief that someone corroborated his story. Guilt that his friend Tyler hadn't been entirely honest about what he had brought. The truth was fragile, bending under the weight of perspective and fear. As court day approached, Jake's home life became a constant balancing act. His parents tried to shield him from the media attention, the school rumors, and the stares of neighbors. But the tension in the house was palpable. His father spent hours pacing, muttering about responsibility and life lessons, while his mother tried to keep the atmosphere calm, preparing meals and making sure he got enough sleep. Jake felt torn between gratitude and irritation. He loved them, but he longed for space from the suffocating reminders of the mistake he hadn't made. School became a battlefield of whispers. Friends avoided him, unsure how to act, while others poked fun at the situation with careless jokes that cut deeper than Jake expected. Teachers, too, seemed to carry a watchful eye. It was as if the mere fact that he had hosted a party that went wrong had shifted his identity in the eyes of everyone around him. He was no longer just Jake, the kid who loved video games and skateboarding. He was Jake, the accused, the cautionary tale, the one under scrutiny. Meanwhile, Tyler acted as if nothing had changed. He continued his life with a casual confidence that made Jake's chest tighten with envy and frustration. Part of him wanted to confront Tyler, to demand responsibility, to scream that this was no longer a game. But another part feared that confrontation could backfire. Tyler's nonchalance was infuriating, but also a reminder that the world was not fair, that accountability was not always evenly distributed. Jake spent hours going over the timeline of the party with Ms. Harper, detailing every conversation, every action, every moment. They documented his efforts to stop the party from escalating, the polite warnings to friends, the attempts to shut down the music, the moments he tried to separate certain people from others. All of it was meant to show that Jake had acted responsibly, that he had tried to prevent disaster. But responsibility, he realized, was a complicated currency. The law demanded more than good intentions. It demanded control over others' actions, a control that he could not have possessed as a 16-year-old teenager. The night before the first court hearing, Jake lay awake in bed staring at the ceiling. The memories of laughter, music, and carefree moments clashed violently with the looming fear of legal consequences. He thought of his friends, his parents, and the life that had felt so ordinary just days ago. How could a single night change everything? He realized with a mix of fear and clarity that life often did. Sometimes the consequences of actions, even when unintended, could be vast, inescapable, and terrifyingly real. The morning of the court hearing arrived with an eerie calm. Jake woke to the sound of birds outside his window, their cheerful chirping a cruel contrast to the storm brewing in his life. His parents hovered, fussing over him as if any gesture could shield him from what awaited. His father handed him a neatly pressed shirt. "You need to look serious," he muttered, adjusting the collar himself before stepping back. His mother brushed a strand of hair from his forehead, whispering, "Just tell the truth. That's all anyone can ask of you." Jake nodded, though his stomach churned with a cocktail of fear, anxiety, and determination. The drive to the courthouse felt endless. Every passing car, every pedestrian on the sidewalk seemed to remind him that the world had shifted. They weren't just driving to a building, they were driving into a new reality, one defined by judgment, scrutiny, and law. Jake gripped the door handle, wishing he could teleport past the marble columns, the towering steps, the solemn windows that seemed to watch him like silent sentinels. Inside the courthouse, the atmosphere was tense. Lawyers hurried past in dark suits, clerks moved with precise efficiency, and the distant gavel of proceedings echoed in the background. Jake's name was called, and his stomach dropped. He followed Ms. Harper down the long corridor to a small room where the other accused teens were waiting. Some faces were familiar, friends from school, classmates, and acquaintances who had been at the party. Their expressions were varied: fear, defiance, indifference. Jake recognized Tyler immediately, leaning against the wall with that same casual confidence that had gnawed at him for days. The hearing began, and the judge entered with a presence that made the room feel impossibly small. The words of the law echoed in Jake's mind as the charges were read aloud. Possession of illegal substances, hosting an event that facilitated criminal activity, endangerment of minors. Each phrase felt like a hammer striking down, final and irrevocable. Jake listened, heart pounding, as the prosecution painted the picture. A wild party, unchecked by parental oversight, spiraling into illegal territory. The words were carefully chosen, highlighting negligence, irresponsibility, and implicit complicity. Ms. Harper rose to defend him. Her voice was calm, deliberate, and precise. She presented evidence, pointing out Jake's efforts to manage the party, his repeated attempts to prevent escalation, and his lack of knowledge regarding the illegal items. Witnesses were called: Laura, who recounted seeing Tyler sneak the bag into the garage, and a few others who confirmed Jake's attempts to keep the party under control. With each statement, Jake felt a mixture of relief and exhaustion. Relief that someone saw the truth, exhaustion from having to relive every small detail of the night, over and over under scrutiny. Tyler's defense was less meticulous. He shrugged, making vague statements, deflecting responsibility, and attempting to shift blame. Jake's frustration bubbled beneath the surface. He wanted to shout, to demand accountability, but Ms. Harper gently reminded him that emotion had no place in court. He bit his lip and nodded, realizing that anger would not protect him, nor would it alter the narrative being constructed by adults in black robes. The judge called a brief recess, and the room emptied into the hallway. Jake wandered to the far corner, overwhelmed by the weight of it all. Parents whispered to their children, teens nervously exchanged texts, and reporters scribbled notes in small notebooks. Jake felt like a specimen under a microscope, exposed and vulnerable. His parents joined him, offering quiet words of encouragement. "We're proud of you," his mother said, though her eyes betrayed worry. His father clasped his shoulder firmly. "Keep your head up, you're stronger than you think." Jake nodded, grateful yet unsure how to believe it himself. When the court reconvened, Ms. Harper made her final arguments. She reminded the judge that Jake's intentions had been pure, that he had not profited, not consumed, and not facilitated the criminal acts knowingly. She emphasized that punishing a teenager for circumstances beyond their control could have lasting consequences on his life. Jake listened, trying to soak in her words, trying to anchor himself in the idea that truth and justice might intersect. As the judge retired to consider the ruling, Jake returned to his seat, stomach twisting with anticipation. The room seemed impossibly quiet now, each tick of the clock magnifying his anxiety. He thought of the night of the party, the music, the laughter, the chaos, and contrasted it with the sterile courtroom, the cold eyes, the heavy weight of accusation. How could a single night so full of fun, curiosity, and teenage recklessness lead here, to this stark confrontation with law and consequence? He realized that life had a way of teaching lessons harshly, often before one was ready. The recess stretched on, minutes bleeding into hours. Jake's thoughts wandered, cycling through fear, regret, and hope. He thought of his friends, his family, the home that had suddenly become a place of scrutiny, and the world outside that seemed so judgmental and vast. He realized that this was more than a legal battle. It was a test of resilience, integrity, and the capacity to endure when circumstances spun wildly out of control. Finally, the judge returned. Jake straightened in his seat, hands clasped tightly, knuckles white. Whatever came next, he knew it would shape his life forever. He took a deep breath, trying to find calm, trying to brace for whatever verdict awaited him. In that moment, he understood the profound weight of responsibility, the fragility of innocence, and the strange, unavoidable lessons of growing up. The courtroom seemed to shrink as Jake waited for the judge to speak. Each second stretched endlessly, like taffy being pulled too far. His mind raced through every decision he had made, every small action at the party, replaying them with cruel precision. He remembered the moment Tyler had sneakily brought in the bag, the laughter echoing in the living room, the fleeting excitement of being in charge of his own little world. Now those memories felt like evidence against him, though in truth, they were only fragments of a chaotic night. His parents sat close, holding hands tightly, eyes fixed on the front. His mother whispered, "Stay calm, Jake. It will be okay." He nodded, but the knot in his stomach made it impossible to breathe normally. The other teens in the room shifted nervously, some fidgeting with their jackets or phones, some staring blankly at the wooden floor. Jake noticed that Tyler seemed unnervingly calm, smirking slightly as if daring the world to punish him. The injustice of it gnawed at Jake, but he forced himself to stay quiet, knowing any outburst could make things worse. The judge finally spoke, his voice slow, deliberate, carrying the weight of authority. After careful consideration of the evidence, testimony, and circumstances surrounding this incident, the court recognizes that while the events of that night involved illegal activity, not all participants acted with intent or malice. Jake's heart thumped in his chest, each word like a lifeline or a potential trap. It is acknowledged that some individuals, including the defendant Jake Henderson, attempted to manage the situation and were unaware of the full extent of the illegal items present. A faint wave of relief washed over him, though he couldn't allow himself to fully relax. The judge continued outlining conditions for probation, community service, and mandatory educational programs about substance abuse and legal responsibility. Jake listened, absorbing each stipulation like medicine he had to swallow, bitter but necessary. He realized that even though he was not being sentenced to a harsh punishment, the experience would linger in his life, shaping him in ways he could not yet comprehend. The court was adjourned and Jake stepped outside, feeling the sunlight like a long-lost friend. The world had not changed. Cars still sped past, people laughed and shouted, and the air carried the familiar sense of city life. Yet everything felt altered. He felt taller, smaller, older, and younger all at once. The night of the party had seemed trivial, a moment of teenage rebellion, but now it was a defining chapter, a story he would carry forever. On the walk to the car, his parents flanked him, their hands firmly holding his. "You were brave today," his father said, voice steady. "You faced something most people never have to, and you kept your integrity." His mother nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. "You did the right thing, Jake. Always remember that." Jake swallowed, fighting the lump in his throat. He wanted to cry, scream, laugh, and nothing all at once. The courtroom, the accusations, and the lingering tension of those hours had left him exhausted, but somehow stronger. Back at home, the silence was profound. The house felt too large, too quiet, yet familiar. Jake walked through the rooms, touching the walls, the furniture, as if re-establishing ownership over his life. Each step reminded him of the fragility of trust, the unpredictability of human behavior, and the consequences of choices, both his and others. He thought of Tyler, wondering if he would ever understand the true weight of what they had been through. Maybe not, but Jake knew one thing: he had survived, learned, and grown. Over the next days, Jake attended the required programs and fulfilled the probation terms. Each session was a reflection, a mirror held up to his actions and thoughts. He listened to stories from others, shared his own experiences reluctantly, and began to see the larger web of consequences that stretched from a single night of youthful recklessness. He realized that the law was not merely punitive, it was a guide, a structure designed to teach lessons, though sometimes through harsh methods. The experience changed his friendships. Some friends drifted away, uncomfortable with the scrutiny and attention. Others remained steadfast, offering support and companionship through the uncertainty. Jake noticed the subtle shifts in behavior: who truly cared, who only wanted fun, and who had priorities beyond the moment. He learned to weigh actions more carefully, understanding that every choice had ripple effects far beyond what the eye could see. At school, whispers followed him. Teachers looked at him differently, some with sympathy, others with a subtle judgment. He ignored it, focusing instead on his studies, his family, and his personal growth. Jake discovered a resilience he had never known, a capacity to face adversity without losing himself entirely. He learned that mistakes, even when innocent, could leave marks, but those marks could also be lessons, shaping one into a stronger, wiser person. By the end of the month, Jake felt a tentative peace. The party, the police, the courtroom, everything had been transformed into a narrative of survival, learning, and reflection. He knew he would carry the experience forever, not as a scar alone, but as a story of endurance and understanding. Life had tested him in a way that was unfair, unpredictable, and relentless, but he had emerged, not unscathed, but undeniably alive, aware, and ready to navigate the complexities of adolescence and beyond. Even after the court's decision, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that the night of the party still lingered over him like a shadow. He tried to sleep, but the images of flashing red and blue lights, the anxious whispers of neighbors, and the sudden chaos played in his mind like a broken movie reel. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the bags of alcohol and drugs, the surprised faces of friends, and the moment the police barged through the door. The fear he had felt then had not fully left him. It had transformed into a quiet vigilance, an awareness that life could pivot on a single misstep. School life resumed, but nothing felt ordinary. Students who had laughed with him now whispered, casting furtive glances in his direction. Some teachers treated him differently, their eyes softening with concern or hardening with unspoken judgment. Jake tried to ignore it, burying himself in homework, sports, and chores at home. His friends had split into groups. Some were distant, wary of being associated with him. Others remained loyal, offering encouragement and a listening ear. He realized that the event had not only tested his character but also revealed who his true allies were. He spent hours reflecting on his actions. Even though he had not intended harm, his presence at the party had linked him to the chaos. He thought about the concept of responsibility, how it extended beyond intent, reaching into the realm of consequence. Every action, even one as seemingly insignificant as letting friends use his home, carried weight. He began to understand the complexity of adult decision-making, a skill he had not fully grasped as a teenager. The legal system had acted, but life had its own ways of teaching lessons that could not be measured in courtroom sentences. At home, the tension between relief and lingering anxiety persisted. His parents were supportive, yet he could see the worry etched into their faces. They treated him more cautiously, often asking where he was going, who he was with, and what plans he had. The protective layer, while comforting, also made Jake feel caged, a subtle reminder that freedom came with responsibility. For the first time, he realized that growing up meant balancing independence with awareness, fun with caution, and trust with discernment. One evening, as he walked alone in the quiet streets of his neighborhood, Jake replayed the night of the party in his mind. He noticed small details he had missed before. The way a friend had nervously glanced around before setting a bag down, the subtle tension in Tyler's smile, the moments when he had almost intervened but hesitated. Each memory was a lesson, a reminder that vigilance, even in moments of fun, was essential. He felt both guilty and enlightened, understanding that life's most significant challenges often appeared disguised as ordinary events. The probation meetings and educational programs continued, and Jake found himself engaging in conversations he would never have had before. Counselors discussed ethics, peer pressure, and consequences. They explored scenarios that made Jake think critically about what he would do in future situations. For the first time, he understood that mistakes were not merely punishable acts. They were opportunities for growth, for learning, and for developing judgment. It was a painful, yet invaluable education. Yet even with growth, fear remained a constant companion. The anxiety of being falsely associated with criminal activity, the pressure of maintaining trust with his family and friends, and the persistent reminders from teachers and peers created a tension that Jake could not entirely escape. Every door he opened, every conversation he had, carried echoes of that one chaotic night. The lesson was clear. Actions, even unintended, could leave a mark that might last far longer than anyone anticipated. Despite the challenges, Jake began to see a silver lining. His experience allowed him to understand empathy in a way he had never before. He could now recognize fear in others' eyes, hesitation in friends' voices, and the subtle weight of unspoken responsibility. He began helping friends navigate difficult situations, sharing his story as a cautionary tale. In doing so, he found purpose, a way to transform trauma into guidance and awareness into mentorship. However, the story was far from over. Tyler, who had contributed to the chaos and yet seemed untouched by consequence, remained a constant, unsettling presence. Jake couldn't shake the feeling that Tyler's next misstep could pull him back into turmoil. The sense of unfinished business lingered, an unresolved tension that reminded Jake that life rarely offered clean endings. Even with lessons learned, peace could be fragile, and vigilance was the price of survival. Jake understood that growth did not erase mistakes. It reframed them. He was not the same teenager who had casually agreed to host a party. He was now aware of the fragile line between fun and recklessness, trust and naivety, freedom and responsibility. The night of the party had become a defining moment, a story of tension, consequences, and ultimate survival that would guide his future decisions. It was both a burden and a gift, a lesson he could not unlearn but could carry with strength, wisdom, and newfound perspective. The months following the party were long and relentless. Jake moved through his days with a careful rhythm, always calculating, always wary. Even minor mistakes now seemed magnified, and every glance from a teacher, every hushed whisper among classmates felt like a judgment waiting to land. The world he had once seen as simple, friends, fun, school, family, had revealed a darker complexity. Freedom was not just the absence of rules, it was a responsibility that carried consequences heavier than he had ever imagined. Jake tried to rebuild his life slowly. He focused on schoolwork, sports, and volunteering at local community centers. The act of helping others gave him a sense of control he had lacked during the chaos of the party. He realized that part of healing meant being proactive, taking steps to ensure he was never caught in a similar situation again. Yet despite all these efforts, anxiety was never far behind. Every text message, every unexpected knock at the door brought a subtle rush of fear. He had learned that one night could ripple through months, leaving traces far beyond the immediate moment. Family life became both refuge and challenge. Jake's parents tried to balance trust and caution. They allowed him more freedom than they did immediately after the party. Yet the air at home carried an unspoken vigilance. They asked questions about friends, plans, and whereabouts, sometimes lingering on details he felt should have been trivial. Jake understood their fear. It was both protective and reflective of the severity of his experience. But it often made him feel like he was walking on a tightrope, one misstep away from being judged once again. At school, the social dynamics were complicated. Some classmates distanced themselves, unwilling to risk association with someone who had been in legal trouble. Others offered support, reinforcing bonds that had proven their resilience. Jake recognized who had true loyalty and who had only offered superficial friendship. These distinctions were important, and Jake learned to navigate social interactions with a heightened sense of awareness. Friendships now required more than shared interests. They demanded trust, responsibility, and a careful understanding of boundaries. Counselors and mentors continued to play a crucial role in Jake's recovery. Group sessions on peer pressure, decision-making, and consequence helped him frame his experiences in a broader context. He began to understand that mistakes, even those not fully within one's control, were opportunities for growth. The court had punished his presence at the party, but life had provided lessons that extended far beyond the courtroom walls. He realized that maturity involved integrating these lessons into daily actions, building resilience, and anticipating challenges before they escalated. Yet tension persisted. Tyler, his former friend who had contributed to the chaos, remained a source of unease. Tyler's charisma and recklessness had allowed him to evade serious consequences, creating a subtle resentment in Jake. There was an underlying fear that Tyler's next impulsive act could implicate him once more. This unease became a quiet shadow, a reminder that past mistakes could echo unpredictably, and that vigilance was not just a personal choice. but a necessary strategy for survival. As Jake reflected on the night of the party, he noticed how small moments had compounded into massive consequences. The casual decision to host a gathering, the trust placed in friends, the minor acts of oversight, all had combined to create a storm far beyond his anticipation. He realized that accountability did not rest solely on those who intended harm, but often on those who had allowed circumstances to unfold without foresight. The weight of this realization was heavy, but it also provided clarity, a framework for living with caution, awareness, and responsibility. In quiet moments, Jake began writing down his experiences. He described the party, the events that unfolded, the legal aftermath, and the ongoing social and emotional challenges. This act of reflection was cathartic, allowing him to analyze his actions and emotions. He saw patterns in decision-making, learned about his responses to fear, and recognized the importance of foresight. Writing became a tool for self-understanding, a way to transform trauma into insight and chaos into order. Even as he grew stronger, a part of Jake remained haunted by uncertainty. The memory of flashing lights, the sudden intrusion of police, and the chaos of the night persisted, woven into his consciousness. Every moment of perceived safety carried the silent question, what if? This question, though uncomfortable, became a guide, a reminder that vigilance, thoughtfulness, and responsibility were not optional, but essential. Jake's story was far from simple. It was a tale of unintended consequences, the fragile line between fun and recklessness, and the lessons that emerged from fear. He had learned to navigate a world where a single night could define months, where trust could become dangerous, and where accountability often extended beyond intent. This understanding shaped his actions, his relationships, and his perspective on life, preparing him for challenges that were yet to come. The weeks rolled into months, and Jake's life began to feel like it was returning to a fragile kind of normal. School routines, homework, soccer practice, and family dinners slowly filled the spaces, once dominated by fear and uncertainty. On the surface, it seemed as if the storm had passed. But Jake knew better. He understood that consequences don't always vanish when the calendar turns. They linger in whispers, in sideways glances, in moments that catch you off guard. One afternoon, a letter arrived in the mail. It was simple, without any markings, but it carried a weight that made Jake's stomach tighten. He tore it open with both anticipation and dread. Inside, the words were brief but clear. The party incident was not over. An anonymous witness had come forward claiming that Jake had played a larger role than the authorities initially thought. The case could be reopened. Panic surged, leaving him dizzy and uncertain. He had rebuilt so much, yet one sentence could unravel it all. Jake felt a cold clarity. He realized that the lessons he had learned, the value of caution, foresight, and responsibility, would now be tested in ways he hadn't imagined. He spent days preparing. He met with his parents, who were furious and worried but stood by him. He contacted the lawyer who had helped him the first time, retracing every event, every conversation, every choice. The truth, he knew, was on his side. Yet truth alone was never enough. Perception, timing, and narrative could tilt the scales in ways that fear and uncertainty could not control. Meanwhile, at school, whispers began again. Tyler's name floated in hallways, sometimes attached to Jake's. Friends were cautious, unsure how to react, while others offered quiet support. Jake realized that trust and loyalty were not abstract ideas. They were tested daily in every glance, every conversation, every passing interaction. His relationships had to withstand scrutiny as much as he did. He learned to navigate these moments with calm, careful strategy, turning fear into focus, anxiety into preparation. In the evenings, Jake returned to his notebook, writing furiously, capturing details, timelines, and reflections. He analyzed every decision, every interaction, searching for vulnerabilities and points of leverage. It became both a defense and a form of therapy. Writing reminded him that he had survived before, that the chaos of that fateful night did not define him, and that he could face uncertainty without being consumed by it. The day of the preliminary hearing arrived. Jake's heart raced, but he had trained himself to move through fear deliberately. He remembered the lessons of the past: honesty, patience, composure. The courtroom was a charged environment filled with observers, parents, and whispers. Tyler was there too, a shadowy reminder of recklessness and the consequences that could spiral out of control. Jake felt a momentary pang of resentment, but quickly redirected it. The focus was on clarity, not emotion. When the proceedings began, Jake presented his story clearly and calmly. His lawyer emphasized the lack of intent and highlighted the facts. He had not participated in illegal activities. He had tried to stop what he could, and he had faced enough consequences already. Witnesses spoke, some in support, some against. The tension in the room was thick, a tangible weight pressing on everyone. Jake understood that life sometimes demanded more than honesty. It demanded presence, awareness, and unshakable focus under pressure. Hours passed like days. Every question, every piece of evidence, every sidelong glance tested his resolve. Jake's mind kept returning to the lessons he had learned during months of fear, reflection, and social navigation. He thought of the night of the party, of the panic, of the fleeting moments of joy and the aftermath that followed. He realized that growth often came from surviving the unpredictable, from facing moments that seemed beyond control, and from emerging with a sense of purpose and clarity. Finally, the judge spoke. The courtroom seemed to hold its breath as the verdict was read. Jake was cleared of additional charges. The case would not be reopened. Relief flooded through him, but it was tempered by awareness. He knew that life had a way of surprising you, that lessons must be internalized to endure, and that vigilance was never optional. The victory was not just legal, it was personal. It was a testament to resilience, awareness, and the courage to face consequences honestly and deliberately. As Jake left the courtroom, he noticed Tyler standing outside, watching. No words were exchanged. Jake walked away steady and calm, understanding that the path forward was his to navigate. The past would always whisper, but the present belonged to him. And somewhere in the distance, Jake felt the first genuine sense of control in months, tempered by the quiet recognition that life could still surprise, challenge, and teach him in ways he had yet to imagine. The story of that fateful night, of trust, recklessness, and accountability would remain with him forever. But now it was no longer a story of fear. It was a story of endurance, of learning, and of the delicate balance between choice and consequence. A story that, like life itself, carried uncertainty, suspense, and the promise of growth, leaving readers to wonder what challenges would come next and how would he face them.